In the southern oceans of Dominia Prime lay a continent of great kingdoms. Far from the war between Urza and Mishra, the lands of Sarpedia prospered. But as the climate changed, resources dwindled and empires crumbled. Hideous new species arose in the forests and the seas, forcing the Sarpedians to fight for their very survival. Recruit these toughened warriors and vicious predators for your duels, but beware, lest you fare no better than the fallen empires.
It's a big day for
That's
it.
a big one.
Yeah, for it, for them.
Yes.
It. For it.
It.
For the set.
Happy birthday.
We're not taking a break from the main series.
Oh, no.
Like, coming soon, we'll be getting on to Volume 4, which will be covering the white cards in Fallen Empires in excruciating detail.
Yes.
But today we wanted to take a moment to talk a little bit about a peculiarity of the exact point in time of Fallen Empire's release. Mm-hmm. If you notice the very beginning of the intro video for this series, the dialogue says Dominia Prime, and the map on the screen says map of Dominaria. Mm-hmm. I actually showed my wife the intro video. I was all proud of having made it, and she's like, okay, but I think you have a problem here. I was like, oh no, that's a feature.
That's intentional. That is a feature.
Yeah. So I have this general sense that I've developed over time that in the early days of the game, sometimes you'd hear the word Dominia, and then sometimes you'd hear Dominaria, and it was all kind of jumbled up, and my pet theory has been that the people inside Wizards, with some clear exceptions, didn't really know what they were talking about, and just got all confused.
And it turns out,
Yeah.
you're right.
That's kind of true.
That's kind of true.
Yeah, so when we were at MagicCon Vegas a couple weeks ago, and we got to go through the line to meet Mark Rosewater, that's what I chose to use my limited time speaking to him to ask was, I want to record what his answer to our question was as best we can before, it's fresh in our minds.
Yes, well, it's right there.
Right, so we asked, Dominia and Dominaria got used interchangeably a lot in the beginning of the game. Was there just confusion internally? And he basically said yes.
That like people kept mixing up the
They
word
kept getting it wrong.
and just like interchangeably using that until came a point where they were like, okay, fine, it's just
Like-
the multiverse, and then this is Dominaria the play.
Like, he asserted that there was a clear intent behind both of the words from the beginning. Like, someone knew what they meant, but not everyone knew what they meant, and so they just kind of got used willy-nilly. So,
Yep, even on the back of the packaging for some of the boosters, like you pointed out. So, we got a legitimate answer from Mark Rosewater himself.
So hyped.
And I got some cards signed.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he confirmed that yes, they did have a clear intention in the beginning of what was what, that Dominia was the world, or what came to be known as the multiverse, and that Dominaria was meant to be the plane, but that, people kept getting them mixed up, using them kind of interchangeably, even within Wizards.
Yep.
And that ultimately they just decided to dispense. They were too similar, and were like, we're just going to stop doing this, and henceforth it's going to be Dominaria and the multiverse.
Yeah. And to say nothing of Dominia Prime, which we'll get back to in a minute. But just to add a few citations, so this is the original printing of the Pocket Player's Guide, which I think came out around the time of Revised, and we've cited it before, which is partly why it has all these little tabs marked in there.
Research notes.
But the second chapter, I think, is all by Richard Garfield, in which he discusses his premise of a multiverse for the setting for this game, calling it Dominia, and not naming any specific plane in it. He talks a little bit about his concept for how planeswalkers move between planes and everything, and how they were motivated in a very selfish way to go and collect resources from one plane to another, and that was their driving. It's a very cynical model for like what the player represented. But then the more interesting thing is this next edition. I think it's the second edition of the book, but it accompanied the 4th edition release of the game, and it replaces that second chapter with a chapter by a man named John Tynes, who a quick Google search reveals was the original, I think, continuity director of the game, but he was only there for like a year at Wizards, or some pretty limited amount of time, but at the right time to contribute to this book. And it starts off, this chapter, The Nature of Dominia, starts off talking about Dominia. But then I think this is the first incidence of the term Dominaria. It might have been in an article somewhere or something, but you want to read from
this paragraph?
Yeah, I think so.
To counter this fear, planeswalkers seek stability. They seek planes that have reliable, well-worn passages among them. They also seek diversity in both magical energy and natural life. Energy to power their magics, and life to bend to their will. All of these things have been found surrounding and enveloping a world known to the planeswalkers as Dominaria, the Song of Dominia. It is on Dominaria, and the planes it routinely touches, that many planeswalkers have come to reside.
Yeah. So I think John Tynes invented the term Dominaria. Please, if you know better, if there is like citation that someone else came up with the term, please tell us.
Please share.
But I also, I've threatened when we were talking about how to make this episode to go off on an hour-long tangent about the history of opera, because they just took Dominia and stuck aria on the end, and aria is an Italian word for song, and in opera it's broken up into recitative, which is still music stuff, but it's like the exposition storytelling stuff, and then arias, which are like the these are my feelings songs, right? And so that's my condensed tangent on that.
That was very condensed.
Yeah. I could have gone.
I know.
Yeah, because there's all this stuff I could say about the history of musical theater and why the lack of recitative is what makes the Broadway musical different than opera, but I'm not doing that. I'm not saying that. Anyway.
Well, that clears that up.
Yes, anyway. So yeah, I think that was really interesting. Oh, but before we get away from this book, that chapter ends with a timeline of Dominaria.
I love the timeline.
Yeah, so I guess this comes out after 4th edition, meaning after Fallen Empires has been released. So we have the Four Horsemen sets, Arabian Nights, Antiquities, Legends, The Dark, Fallen Empires, and I think Ice Age, then 4th edition, and this comes out. So that's all that's happened. And what's really interesting is still making an assumption that it's John Tynes who invented the term Dominaria, but also he's making all these assertions that I don't know. Let's read this. It is now the present day on Dominaria section and see what it says there, because I think it's kind of funny.
Okay. The Ice Age is a distant memory, and the people and places of Magic the Gathering 4th edition are present on a large continent known commonly as the Domains. The people and places of the Arabian Nights expansion are also present during this time period, as is the action of the novels. On the continent of Stonehaven, the action of the comic books transpires as well.
Yeah, so, like, none of that's canon anymore, pretty much. I mean, Arabian Nights definitely is on its own plane in the canon now, Arabia.
Elsewhere.
The novels, I think that's referring to, like, the Greensleeves trilogy, and that is now, I think that has remained canonically on Dominaria. That actually stuck, because that's why we have, like, the Greensleeves, I forget what the bonus sheet was there, but in Dominaria United, they printed a bunch of different cards of, like, Legends Revisited or Reimagined or something, and she was included in that. But what else did they say there? The continent of Stonehaven. Is that actually still on the map?
Yeah,
I don't recognize that. The map is large and thorough, and I'm not sure what's meant by the domains. That might have a newer name too. But this is the official map per Wizards that they came up with during the release of Dominaria, the set. Yeah. So yeah, I thought that was interesting that, you know, big step that they call it, they name it Dominaria, which is stuck, and they make all these other assertions which absolutely have not stuck. But then I think the most amusing citation I could find for where they clearly did just like have people confused about what the two words meant within Wizards is in this book, which we've mentioned before, the official Magic Encyclopedia, which it notes is by the editors of The Duelist. The Duelist was the magazine published by Wizards. Mark Rosewater was one of the editors. Well, I don't know if he was the editor, but he was one of the contributors. But he's definitely like that category of person who's writing this book. And in the section on antiquities, we find the only other reference to Dominia Prime. Here, you want to start from the top of that?
Sure. Let's see. Antiquities was the first Magic set to have a coherent story behind the release, supported by the cards both in functionality and flavor. Set on the continent of Tertiaire, on the central world of the Magic multiverse, originally called Dominia Prime, then known as Dominaria.
Yeah, that's what I was talking about.
Yes.
Like, that's the only other time, that's the only other reference to Dominia Prime I have been able to find anywhere. But that does kind of explain what happened. So internally, someone decides, okay, this world that we've decided all this stuff is taking place on, we're going to give it its own unique name. Since it's not the same as the multiverse, it's more specific. It's a thing within the multiverse, so we'll call it Dominia Prime. But then John Tynes, the continuity editor, I guess, decided we need a better name, Dominaria.
Is Dominia Prime mentioned on any of the booster packs that you have?
Yeah, that's the one that Fallen Empires,
okay.
and only Fallen Empires.
That's the only time that happens.
Yeah, none of the other booster packs say that. So, like the Antiquities and Legends packs reference Dominia on the back, and the Dark. And I'll show those on the screen. What was the other? Oh, right. The Duelist, again, the official magazine put out by Wizards, the third issue is the one where they included those token sheets that we've looked at a couple times in the other episodes. The story blurb, which we've also referenced, is followed by that introductory paragraph in which they talk about, we've added all these different arts, so you don't have to have 30 copies of Sylvain Elves, and so we're not going to have to print so many.
Yeah, we don't want you to be overwhelmed.
Like all the cards we're printing every year.
Yes.
But they also say set on Dominaria Prime in the era after the Antiquities War.
Yes.
Which, okay, so obviously that's wrong. If Dominia Prime is the same as Dominaria, then yeah, so they got that wrong there too. Oh, yeah. But I stopped us too fast, because in the encyclopedia, after they've defined in the Antiquities intro that, okay, we called it Dominia Prime for a little bit, then you go on to the intro for the Dark, and they say that after the Antiquities War came the Dark Age of Dominia, when rich and powerful magicians, blah, blah, blah. But, like, that didn't happen to Dominia. That just happened to Dominaria, or, if you really want to call it that, Dominia Prime. So, just so much confusion. And so that prompted our question to Morrow, and he kind of sighed and rolled his eyes. He was wearing a mask probably to protect himself from the contagion of the millions of us who he is seeing every day, so you couldn't see his full expression.
Yeah, he didn't want our...
But it was like, seriously, these guys, they could not keep anything straight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, it was a very anti-Phyrexian stance, you know, to not want all our infections, but, you know, I guess that's fine.
Yeah.
But yeah, he did seem kind of exasperated, but very willing to talk about it when we asked. He was like, oh yeah, that was definitely a thing.
So yeah, that was our fun little adventure. If you do know any more actual hard facts about this, I would be delighted to hear about them in the comments.
Yes, please.
And we'll be back pretty soon, probably in the next week or two, with the next big volume on the white cards.
Test sounds.
Yes.
It makes sound.
It makes sound.
It makes sound.